If you've been gardening for a while, you know that earthworms are the unsung heroes beneath the soil. They loosen compacted ground, cycle nutrients, and quite literally transform lifeless dirt into living soil. On my channel, Soil to Seed, I'm always talking about ways to work with nature, not against it. But today I want to share something a little unusual, a weird trick I use that makes earthworms gather in my beds like kids at a candy store. It's not fancy, it's not expensive, in fact it's probably sitting in your kitchen right now, and when you bury it in your soil, you'll see the worm activity explode. Curious? Stick with me. I promise this little secret will change how you feed your soil forever. Before I spill the secret, let's talk about why we even care about worms. I know some gardeners see them as just slimy creatures hiding in the compost pile, but they are literally your garden's underground workforce. Every tunnel they dig creates tiny pathways for air and water to reach plant roots. Their castings are like gold for your soil, rich in nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and beneficial microbes. The more worms you have, the healthier your garden will be. If you've ever dug into lifeless, compacted ground and felt like your shovel was bouncing off concrete, you've seen what happens when worms are missing. On the flip side, when you dig into worm-rich soil, it feels loose, crumbly, and alive. That's why gardeners like us are always on the lookout for ways to invite more of them into our plots. Here's the secret. I bury plain, uncooked oatmeal in my garden beds. Yep, oatmeal. Not the instant stuff with sugar and flavoring, just plain rolled oats or steel-cut oats. When I first tried this, I wasn't sure what to expect, but within a week, when I scratched back the mulch, I saw earthworms wriggling all over the buried oats like they were having a party. Why does it work? Oats are high in carbohydrates that break down quickly. When they decompose, they become an irresistible food source not just for worms, but also for the microbes that worms love to eat. Think of it as setting out a buffet where both bacteria and worms get a seat at the table. The result? Rapid decomposition, more worm activity, and nutrient-rich soil. This trick is simple, but there are a few details that make a big difference. Here's how I do it in my own garden. First, I never just dump oats on the surface. If you leave them exposed, you'll probably attract pests like birds, rodents, or even ants before the worms get a chance. Instead, I dig a shallow trench or hole about 2 to 3 inches deep. That's the sweet spot where worms are active and where the oats will decompose quickly. Next, I scatter a handful of plain oats into the trench. You don't need a lot. Think of it like seasoning your soil rather than pouring in a full meal. Then I cover the oats back up with soil and if possible add a light layer of mulch on top. That mulch layer helps retain moisture, which worms absolutely love. Within a few days the oats start breaking down, microbes move in, and soon after worms show up in droves. Here's something I learned the hard way. Oats only work their magic if there's enough moisture in the soil. If the ground is bone dry, the oats just sit there like hard little pellets. Worms won't touch them, but in damp soil they swell up, soften, and become edible for microbes and worms alike. That's why I recommend burying oats right after watering your beds, or just before a rain. In my climate, I also like to tuck them under mulch because the mulch locks in moisture and keeps the microenvironment stable. Moisture, oats, and mulch. It's a simple trifecta that worms can't resist. Now don't go crazy and dump pounds of oatmeal all over your garden. Too much of a good thing can backfire. If you overload the soil, you'll create a soggy, smelly mess that might attract pests. Instead, I like to think of it as a treat for my worms. Once every 2 to 3 weeks during the growing season, I bury a handful or two of oats in different spots around the garden. Rotating the placement keeps worms exploring and helps distribute nutrients evenly. Over time, you'll notice your soil texture improving. It becomes darker, crumbly, and full of worm tunnels. That's when you know the oats are doing their job. So why not just use kitchen scraps or compost? The truth is, I use those too. But oats have a unique advantage. They break down fast. Vegetable scraps can take weeks to decompose, and not all worms are interested in fresh peels or cores right away. But oats soften almost instantly in moist soil, which makes them a quick win for boosting worm activity. That doesn't mean you should give up on compost. In fact, compost is the foundation of healthy soil. But if you want to give your worm population a boost, or jumpstart activity in a new garden bed, oats are like flipping on the open sign for the worm buffet. For the science-minded gardeners, here's what's happening. Oats are rich in starches. When buried, soil microbes start breaking those starches down into simple sugars. Worms aren't actually eating the oats themselves, they're eating the microbes and the partially decomposed material. The more microbes you attract, the more worms show up. It's a whole ecosystem at work, fueled by a handful of oats. Over time, those worms leave behind castings that are packed with plant-ready nutrients. And because worms tunnel as they move, they also aerate the soil, which improves root penetration and water infiltration. So, burying oats isn't just feeding worms, it's activating the whole soil food web. If you give this trick a try, don't expect to see worms instantly crawling to the surface. They'll come at night when the soil is cooler and safer, but give it a week or two, and when you dig into the spot where you buried oats, you'll almost always find more worm activity than in untreated soil. Another bonus I've noticed, plants near the oat burial sites tend to perk up a little faster, especially leafy greens. That's because worm castings provide a slow, steady release of nutrients right where roots can access them. As much as I love this trick, I want to be clear, it's not a magic bullet. Oats won't fix poor soil overnight. If your soil is compacted clay or sand with no organic matter, you'll still need to amend it with compost, mulch, and other organic inputs. Oats are more of a booster than a replacement. Also, be careful not to bury flavored or sugary oats. Cinnamon apple instant packets might smell good to you, but the additives aren't great for your soil ecosystem. Stick with plain oats for best results. At the end of the day, gardening is about building relationships with the living world under our feet. Worms are part of that partnership, and oats are a simple, almost silly way to strengthen it. The first time I buried a handful of oats and saw worms swarming the spot, I realized how little it takes to work with nature instead of fighting it. If you want to boost your soil health, attract more earthworms, and give your plants a thriving environment, try burying a handful of oatmeal. It's cheap, easy, and surprisingly effective. So there you have it. The weird thing I bury that makes earthworms fight over my garden. Next time you're about to pour a bowl of oatmeal for breakfast, save a handful for your soil. Your worms will thank you, and your plants will too. If you found this tip helpful, I'd love for you to join me over on my YouTube channel, Soil to Seed. That's where I share hands-on experiments, practical gardening hacks, and ways to grow more food with less fuss. Don't forget to hit subscribe and share this article with a fellow gardener. Together we can build healthier soil, one handful of oats at a time.